Welcome back to another episode of the Strength and Speed Podcast. I'm your host, Strength and Speed owner and Mudgear Battle Alliance Pro, Evan Preparis. I got a guest with me on the line. Before we get to him, though, a quick word from this episode's sponsor. This episode is brought to you by Aurora Heated Apparel. So it's winter, it's cold. If you haven't checked out Aurora, definitely check it out. It's electronically heated apparel, super nice, keeps you warm. They just released their dual heated jacket. So it's not only like the normal one, the one I have has heating in the front and the back. They now have ones with heating in the front, back, and the arms. So multiple areas of heat. Great if you're doing tailgating. Great if you're going to a sports game in the winter. Great if you've got your pit crew and you want to keep them warm. Or you just like being warm, you know, driving to and from work and walking around town. It's like being hugged in a warm blanket. You can check them out over at aurorawear.com. OROROWEAR.com. All right, joining me on the podcast, I got a friend from work. I got Jon on the line. Jon, say hi.
Hey, everybody.
Cool. I'm going to run through his bio real quick, and then we'll kind of get into what this episode's about. So Jon Jordan is an Army helicopter pilot and black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. He's competed at the all-Army level in 3 different categories: Soldier of the Year, Best Medic, and Combatives Tournament. Jon's been training martial arts for over 16 years, holds a black belt in Wado Ryu Karate, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. He's competed in many local and regional martial arts tournaments, and then due to the nature of his military career, he's trained with many professional MMA and jiu-jitsu competitors all over the world. Currently, he trains at Combative Sports Center in Manhattan, Kansas, under Sean Roberts and Joe the Nose Wilk. Does Joe appreciate that nickname?
He does. I don't know if you've seen Joe's nose. I think it's been broken a dozen times from all of his MMA fights over the years, but it's more of like a badge of honor for him at this point.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I met Joe last year. We 1st Infantry Division actually took a bunch of people to NTC, and he was one of the guys we took, so I got to hang out with him for about 4 days. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a fun guy, and he's one of like the OG Midwest MMA fighters before, you know, MMA was really getting big and there was jiu-jitsu gyms popping up everywhere.
Right. So I met Jon. Met him a little more personally a couple of weeks ago. We were doing some combatives training, and he's rolling me up in a ball there. And then we started talking about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and some of the kind of the sport structure of it, how the different organizations and the push for the Olympics and stuff like that. And I thought it was really interesting in how it relates to obstacle course racing. So this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about his background, about training in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and martial arts. And then we're kind of the second half of the episode, we're going to focus more on like the structure of the sport and how that relates to OCR and, you know, some of the good things and bad things that might come from that. So I guess let's start with, I mentioned a little bit about your background in martial arts. You know, tell us a little bit more like how you got involved and, you know, why you decided to go from karate to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and kind of expand your horizon there.
Yeah, so I didn't do any fighting growing up. I was just a runner growing up and mostly just because my dad and my brother ran, right? And naturally, I just wanted to beat them at whatever they do. So that got me into cross country and track. But in college, I needed a PE. I went to Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama, and I couldn't get any of the cool ones when I was trying to sign up. And so I did karate because I thought that would be kind of fun, but it wasn't one of like the easy A bowling or like the cool kayaking one that a bunch of my buddies were doing. So trying out karate though, it was pretty fun. You know, I grew up watching, you know, kung fu movies and anime and stuff like that, like a lot of other people, and, you know, playing like fighting video games. So I kind of got hooked on it, started keeping up with karate, and it was karate is a traditional style. So you're going to a dojo and you got a sensei and you're bowing and wearing a formal uniform and learning all the kind of like the Eastern philosophy that goes along with that. So it was fun. And we skipped forward a couple of years. I saw UFC Ultimate Fight, like the Ultimate Fighter reality show. And there's a couple of dudes on there. They were like Taekwondo striker type guys, and they got annihilated by MMA jiu-jitsu guys. And it was for a lot of people too, it was kind of a shock to me, because growing up, you know, all I knew about grappling was like the WWE stuff. And when you're just messing around with your friends, it's not real, right? You're kind of like, oh no, you got me, right? Oh, you got the pin, you got the tap out, and it's not real like damaging moves, and it's kind of like, oh well, if you're a tough guy, you can just tough it out, right? And the moves are fake anyway, so you're not really hurting each other. And so I decided I would go try jiu-jitsu since I saw Stephan Bonner tap out Mike Swick with a triangle choke. And Mike Swick was supposed to be a great striker. Stephan Bonner was like a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. And I was like, all right, this stuff looks interesting. I happened to be back home for summer. So I looked up like the best jiu-jitsu school in Atlanta at the time. It was the old Jacare from Brazil. So this dude, I didn't know this at the time, like how important this was, right? But he was one of the guys, taught Matt Larson combatives, helped found like the combatives program for the Army. He's like a first generation student under Holes Gracie from Brazil. He came to Georgia to like, he was one of like those original pioneers, like starting the school, spreading the jiu-jitsu everywhere. So I go there. At the time, I was already a fairly competitive brown belt in karate. I've already been like winning some tournaments, thought I was tough. And I got annihilated. It wasn't close. And it was like, it's like a punch to the ego, and it was like eye-opening at the same time because, I've been doing these tournaments, and karate tournaments are kind of tough. There's no weight classes. There's no age group for them. And they're based on belt structure. So I was, competing against, heavyweight adults, whatever. And then I went in the jiu-jitsu class. They're nice. They'll pair you up with someone similar size. And man, just like the blue belt, purple belt level guys in that gym, they just like worked me like a puppet, right? Like did the move of the day, whatever we learned in class, made it look like, I couldn't defend it. And you feel like it's like a child fighting an adult,
Yeah, that's a good example.
You're defenseless, and it's frustrating. And of course the rules, like, well, I can't punch them. I knew some good striking from karate, but that's worthless in this world. And so that is really the initial thing that gave me the bug, because then I just realized, I got to learn it, right? Like, it's not optional. It was like going from the bow and arrow to the firearm. I was just like, wow, these guys, they have a whole nother weapon system that we haven't even touched in the stuff I was doing.
Yeah, your journey sounds a lot like, it's basically, I feel like for about 20 years, from starting from like UFC 1 up until about 20 years later, like every martial artist at some point was like, yeah, I need to know grappling. So, anyone who's serious about training martial arts, because when you fight your opponent, he has a vote on what range you end up fighting in. So, and that's what Royce Gracie did in the first couple UFCs. He basically closed the gap into the grappling range, and people didn't know what they were doing. They were like panicking. He'd get in the mount and people would just panic and like tap out. He's like, he didn't even do anything to them. So pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that it looks very simple, like a dude laying on top of another dude. But these guys have studied it for years, and they've broken it apart, and they know, oh, well, actually it's very scientific, right? Like, I'm putting my knee in this spot. I'm putting my foot in this spot. I'm grabbing this side of his shoulder to stop these moves, and gives me access to these other moves. And you're like, oh, okay. So there's a whole lot to this that I never knew before. And I just thought was like, oh, these guys are just rolling around and whatever. I am tough. I could take that.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, well, the hand needs to be positioned this way if you're going to do an arm bar, and like the thumb's got to be up, and, your wrists are turned out. No, they got to be turned in. Otherwise you're not cutting off the artery on the neck there. So there's a lot of nuance to it that I think, coming from a non-grappling art, it's like, oh, like this is, this single move has like 7 sub-steps, as opposed to being like throw a punch, and like, throwing a punch is relatively simple. There's technique to it, but there's not as much nuance as there is in grappling Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, it took you, how long did it take you to get your first degree black belt in karate?
So karate only took me about 3.5 years.
Okay.
But karate it's an older, much more traditional style, and it's very curriculum based. And so like a lot of the older martial arts like that are, and like it's written out, what you got to
Right.
memorize for each belt rank, and then it's kind of like there's a timeline and there's a belt test. And so yeah, it's like cool to get a black belt in those sports, but it's like dragging your butt through getting a degree, right? Like you can make it if you just keep doing it.
Yeah.
It's not really that hard.
So now compare and contrast that to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Tell us how long that takes, or for
Yeah.
you. To,
So the average time to make it to black belt, they say, is 10 years. It took me about 15. I would love to blame like, the army and, being stationed in weird places where I couldn't train and stuff like that. But it's map time, right? So jiu-jitsu is very, very competency based. If you don't get better and progress, like you don't get promoted to the next belt rank, which is it's a better system, right? Especially for keeping the martial art respected against other martial arts. When you meet a guy that's a blue belt, purple belt in jiu-jitsu, when you roll with them, like, like they've got that skill level that they put in the time to earn. And for me, I told myself starting out, because I was training a bunch, but I was still working out a bunch. And then when I joined the Army, I was still doing lots of Army stuff, right? And I've done a few different Army jobs that are be pretty intense. And I was like, well, I'll make it, 1-2 days a week. I'll get some jiu-jitsu in here or there, and I'll keep progressing. But I put myself on a much lower, much longer timeline for getting better. And moving around also kind of helps and kind of hurts. You see a lot of different techniques out of different schools, but then different instructors are looking for different things to promote you. So, I'd be training in Korea and they'd be all looking at competition type stuff. And I'd be, come to Kansas and they're all very like hard-nosed MMA focused school. So it's just like different styles and kind of how it is respected in other schools. So yeah, definitely the long path for me. But hopefully, I'm still young enough. I've got another like 20 years or so of training in me, and I'll get better from here and keep growing as a black belt.
nice. Yeah. So if you're just joining us for the first time, this is primarily an obstacle course racing focused podcast. But the concept is we bring on people from other sports because obstacle course racing is relatively new. I'd say about a decade old. But fitness and improving and mastering a complex skill is old. And so we can steal lessons from other sports and other complex skills and competitive aspects and pull them into the obstacle course racing world. So, yeah, just for our listeners, have you done any obstacle course races?
So I've done a couple actual like OCRs through the Spartan race guys. And then through the military, I've done some weird obstacle courses, right? Like there's the river obstacle course we run, that every base has one, and you do those for, different schools, or I've done them with the different competitions, doing like the Soldier of the Year stuff, Best Medic stuff. And then I've done a bunch of weird, the Army we like putting together. So we have, mixed matched obstacles, or we throw in like different soldier type tasks, like, or combat skills mixed in. And then with the medical and like the best medic stuff, we did a lot of the litter obstacle course, which is basically, your standard obstacle course race. However, you have a patient with you, right? And so it's either a dummy or a live person, and you and your team or your battle buddy, you got to figure out how to not only navigate the obstacle, but get the patient through without harm to them. And so that's kind of a fun one to have to figure out and navigate as you go through different events. So,
You broke up a little bit towards the end, but yeah, you were saying about the medical one. That's a fun one to do and navigate through. We've had 2 obstacle course race companies that I know of that have done sort of like a buddy team type OCR. There was one called the Tandem Race where I think you were actually tied to each other. I think that lasted like a year or two back in 2014, 2015. And then KC Timber Challenge actually has in April a Duo Dare Challenge, which just some of the obstacles are kind of buddy team based, so you're supposed to run it with a friend. So I'll be heading out to that one in Bonner Springs, Kansas, once that one takes off. I believe it's April 19th or something like that. But yeah, the Army obstacle course is very, a lot of crossover points with, sport OCR, because it's essentially compromised running. You're running and you're doing some sort of high heart rate activity in between, and then you're back into that running mode. So yeah, good stuff. So talk to me a little bit about, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and, any kind of crossover lessons you think that would apply to the world of obstacle course racing.
Yeah, so I think, well, the obstacle course and jiu-jitsu are kind of one of those unique things that you can't always do it, right? Just for the training. Like, I mean, like for a running, just solely running race, you can just go run, right? And if you're a power lifter, you can just go power lift, if you've got the equipment. But it's hard to mimic, that event it's going to be unique, right? Like you haven't been to that OCR or that tournament before. You're going to face different obstacles, different people, and you can't necessarily prepare specifically for it, right? And you also can't do like, all right, well, if I'm just going for completion, I'm running those miles. I know I'm going to make the miles when I show up the day of. So it's kind of the fun thing, like that unknown, and then there's that chance of failure, right? Like you might not be able to do it all, and for jiu-jitsu, like, you might get the previous champion in your bracket and like first round. So, you might just have to like give it your all and go for the gold that first time. And if you don't make it, you don't make it, so training outside of the sport, you have to get creative, right? Especially if you don't have enough money to build your own like crazy rigs at home, right? And then for jiu-jitsu, like most people can't afford fancy mats to keep at their house, or like a $1,000 grappling dummy, even though they're super cool. And during COVID, people were buying them, but you have to improvise, how you're gonna train for your sport. So one of the things I've done with my conditioning stuff for jiu-jitsu is, well, I've kind of like boiled it down to not only, I think, what works for grappling, right? So that means doing things that improve grip strength, that use the entire body, those kind of general principles, but also like, what do I actually do? Like my jiu-jitsu game, right? Like how I like approaching a sweep or submission, and like the muscle groups I use. So I do a lot of so high repetition, low weight deadlifts, because that posterior chain and that deadlift motion, when you start like dissecting how you can do jiu-jitsu moves, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I can use this obviously for picking up my opponent's leg. Then I can use the same type deal for throwing their legs to the other side and passing the guard. I'm going to use it for extending my body to control their upper body. And then when I'm going for extending an arm for an arm bar or applying pressure to a choke, once again, I'm expanding myself using that posterior chain. So trying to feed things into that in conditioning outside the sport to better prepare for, you want that like as close to direct transfer as you can get from your outside training. So it's using bands, it's using kettlebells. I've been slowly like amassing my own like home gym with some of that stuff. I hate doing some of my jiu-jitsu workouts in the normal gym because I'm sure it looks kind of dumb, to other people who are your traditional power lifters, because I like cable machines. I'll sit on the ground and pull the cables down, because a lot of times it's what you're doing. If you're playing an open guard, you're reaching up and trying to control your opponent's head, and you want it to mimic that real world application for you. And then, doing different grip strength, which I'm sure you've played around with a lot for all the different climbing events and stuff you got to do. And like for jiu-jitsu, it's not necessarily holding a weight. So like holding a barbell, right? That might be an unrealistic grip for me, right? Like I can never hold someone's arm that well.
Yeah.
I'm going to arm bar. The arm it's odd shaped. It's a little different for everybody. They're turning it. It's moving in your hand while you're trying to control it. And so a lot of the stuff that I'll do at home, I either take an old gi top or a towel, and you're putting that over the pull-up bar to do your pull-ups, or you're around your bar to do your pulls, and getting a better feel of having to compensate your grip, having to, kind of work through if it's a little off, right? Like one hand has a good grip, one hand doesn't. That shouldn't stop you from being able to control a limb. And then there's, like the isometric like hold, which is not in most of your programs people are going to do for training, right? Like that's not your get big workout, but you find out in grappling real quick that, people can hold their breath. And if you're going for a guillotine, cross collar choke, something like that, if you squeeze, but you only squeeze for about 30 seconds, like some dudes will literally hold their breath, and then when you let go, they'll exhale and they're fine. They'll keep fighting, like stubborn people. So you wind up, doing your like chin over the bar pull-ups and holding those, or heavy rows in with a kettlebell or a band, and timing yourself. I try to do like, 1 minute holds at least, stuff like that. I'll do some 2-minute holds on lighter weight because I figure, under stress, most people can't hold their breath for in that 1 to 2 minute range. So if I can build that kind of isometric squeeze for myself outside of training, that's going to help my submission rate go up against those guys who are they're trying to psych me out, right? Like they're waiting for that release in my muscle tension to escape. But yeah, just trying to come up with things outside of the gym when I can't make it to training, right? When I'm traveling, I don't have training partners or mats, how I can, simulate the feedback you get from another person in live training. And it can be tough.
Yeah, no, I loved that. Everything you said. I mean, it sounds like all the stuff I recommend for obstacle course racing, right? So you're mimicking a lot of the movements, and, instead of using the traditional weight attached, like for pulling machines, I recommend bringing like rig grips and kind of getting used to putting your hand in those odd positions that are required for crossing a rig and pulling down using those. I do them in public gyms, and people do stare. I just stopped. I stopped caring long ago, and I'll show up with a bag full of like random rig parts and just start like setting things up in a gym, and people are staring at me, and I'm like, whatever. So, but yeah, it is. The first couple of times I did it, I felt like super awkward, and then at some point I just stopped caring. But yeah, they really like a lot of the things you were saying, and I think on a lot of people for like grip strength, at least in OCR, will be like, oh, I got these grippers, and I'm just like pumping out reps on the gripper, and it's like, well, that's not simulating what you do in a race. Like when I grab something in a race, I squeeze it and I hold it, right? So if my recommendation for people who love to use those grippers is you squeeze and you hold for 5 seconds, because that's at least how long you'll be up on a rig, before you transfer and go to the next hold. So yeah.
Yeah, and I've experimented with so many. I'm sure you probably have too. So many different grip trainers. When they come out, and everyone they'll hit the online market, right? And everyone's like, oh, this is the next best thing. And most of them are based around that the dynamic squeeze, right? And some of them are like, oh, well, this is a 10-pound grip, or this one's a equivalent to however many pounds of squeeze.
Yep.
But I really, in my line of competition, it's like I just need the steady squeeze for the long haul. Like if I could grip somebody for an entire 10-minute match and never get tired, I might do it, right? Because every time you let go of a grip, you give an opportunity for your opponent to move, for them to control it, or to use it against you. And it's one of the things the judo guys excel at. They're big about gripping heavy and fast and then not letting go. They're very stubborn. And they don't really have to, because they can just throw and they can keep the same grips a lot of times. For jiu-jitsu, like you generally can't keep the initial grips, because you want to move to a choke or a submission, right? Just knocking a dude over on his shoulders for like a pin or a throw is not going to do it. But I don't even know how many grip trainers I've run through now. I was keeping like a box of them, and I let my kids play with them for fun, but I just keep coming back to, like a gi or a towel just thrown over a pull-up bar. That seems to be like the old standby that keeps on working for me.
Yeah, I mean that's the most specific, so that's what makes the most sense. And I have a bunch of grippers as well, and I rarely use them, to be honest with you. Um, but like I said, if people do like that, one, I recommend holding it, and two, treat it as like part of an actual workout. Like I think some people are like, oh, I'll just leave it in my car and just do 50 reps on the way to work or something. It's like, well, no, like it should be part of your workout. Like this is the next exercise I'm doing. I'm doing, gripper strength, and I'm going to hold it for whatever, 5 second holds each, etc. So, talk to me a little bit about like the mental, like kind of mindset going into a jiu-jitsu match, and even mindset like mid-match.
So for jiu-jitsu, it can be different. Usually, if you're just doing a tournament, especially if you're just like a regular competitor, you're just trying to have confidence in your skill, and it's like a strange thing, right? Because you might be the best guy in your gym. You might be beating people on a regular basis who are good, and they're also competing, or you might not, right? Like you might be a mid-level dude in your gym. You're starting out, and it's tough when you get beat by other people going in this competition, and everyone's, you've never trained with them before. You don't know what kind of moves they do, and trying to keep confidence in like, hey, I know our game plan, what we do at my gym, and what works for me, and just sticking to that. And then a lot of jiu-jitsu, I really like the analogy of an argument. People say, you're arguing the position, you're being stubborn, and that can be it a lot, right? So after that initial mindset of just having confidence, implementing your game, and that might work, right? Like you might go into a match. I think I've had like a handful of matches where I've gone in, got the throw I wanted, got the pass I wanted, and then got the submission I wanted. It usually doesn't go that way, right? Like the guy counters, maybe you catch him off guard with the first move, but then they throw their best thing at you second move, something like that. And then you got to fight through. And it becomes this kind of argumentative, like, all right, what am I going to give up versus what do I want? And you're trying to keep this all super quick, right? You're trying to do everything by kind of like your muscle memory and keeping your your OODA loop decision timeline as short as possible. Because the quicker you make your decisions when you're going through your technique, progressing towards a submission, the better, right? The faster you progress through these positions, the more your opponent gets behind, and the more you'll win. The hard part becomes, especially for me, is when you're mid to late match with someone. Maybe they're up on points, maybe they're not, but you're in like a somewhat neutral position, and neither one of you want to give an inch, right? The other guy's not doing anything dumb, and there's always kind of like an easy way you could trick the guy. You can bait him. You could kind of relax. You could say, oh, well, maybe I'll let him think he's getting this escape, or maybe I'll let him grab my arm and think he's going to get this arm bar. And for me, I try to be patient and avoid that. I used to be, especially like in the gym, training with people, even in the competitive mode, just like, all right, well, I'll let him go for this arm bar, and I'm going to escape, right? I'm going to use this against him, and I'm going to get out. And that only works against, people who don't have the skill to finish the move. When you run into those better fighters who, oh, that happens to be their move, you just gave them the win, right? And so kind of a hard learning point for me has been during a match is that like patience, right? Like I know I'm not winning yet, but I should not do anything dumb. I should not give up anything easy. And if I got to make this guy like suffer or wait him out, kind of like it's like you're staring at another person waiting for them to talk. You got to wait. And then that's usually when the other person, they make the mistake, right? Like they get impatient. They try that move that maybe it's a low percentage move, but they think it's going to work on you. And that gives you the opening for the solid counter and the progress you were looking for. And then usually like the mindset at the end of the match if you get once you're like honed into that submission or that good controlled position, and you're up on points and you're in position to finish with a good submission, it's just you just got to do it. You just kind of block out. Yeah, I know I'm tired. Yeah, I know my forearms are burning. Right, like the grips are done. The breathing's done, but I just got to finish this match. Right, if I don't finish it now, it's going to be worse. Right, it's better to just try to power through that final wall and get it over with and win, then to leave it up to the judges. Judges' decisions can always be a coin toss, especially if it was a close on points match, and you never want to do that, especially if you've prepared really hard for a match and you're better than the other guy. You want to win definitively with the submission, so it's worth pushing through even at the end of the round if that's what it takes.
Nice. Yeah, no, a lot of good comparisons we can make there about, especially with mandatory completion obstacle course racing, there's the race is never over until essentially you cross the finish line or someone crosses the finish line. So, we always make sure, focus on doing all the obstacles and getting them first try and maintaining a good pace. And, if the other guy messes up, he messes up and you might sweep ahead. And if not, then, sometimes that's the way it is. So I want to switch over and start talking about some of the structure of jiu-jitsu. So tell us about like the organizations and the kind of the major competitors and players as far as like brands and how those kind of align and compare to each other. And then we can kind of talk a little bit about Olympics, stuff like that.
Okay, so within the jiu-jitsu world, the two main versions of competition are the gi, which is wearing the traditional, like the traditional kimono, whatever you want to call it. It's the thick martial arts uniform. That's what we call the gi. And then there's the very appropriately named no gi, which is just the opposite, right? It's the t-shirt and shorts or no shirt, rash guard, whatever. It's kind of like the slick version of fighting. And so within these two major types of competition, their own tournaments have kind of sprung up. So the biggest one for the gi tournaments is the IBJJF, which is the International Brazilian Jiu Jitsu Federation, and they're kind of one of the older brands, right? Like they've been running tournaments in Brazil and America for a while. They were the ones that came up to the States and started what they call a Pan Ams, which was really, it was like a national level tournament. And then they started running, they're Portuguese based, like it's mostly Brazilian guys who founded it. They started running the Mundials, which is like their worlds. And so they were the ones originally who were kind of like crowning people world champion, right? And they were the biggest organization. So I think they're probably the right one, even though there's so many other ones nowadays and that want to claim, oh, well, this is our national championship, this is our worlds. I think most people would recognize in the gi, the IBJJF is like, that is the national or world level competitor organization that you would want to win to consider yourself a national champion or world champion. And they do national events, they do world events, and then they do like an open in most of the major cities. They do, and it's kind of like qualifiers as well, so you can get enough points to go to the world event, because the brackets can be limited. It's not as open as like a race, right, where you can just run big heats. Most of them are single elimination, so that helps, right? When you run a double elimination tournament, you wind up having two full brackets running, which is twice the mat space, twice the judges and referees and all that. So single definitely streamlines it, but a lot of these tournaments, they'll have around 16 people per bracket, right? And they cut in half every way down until the last two are fighting for first place. So that won't be a lot, right? Like if you're looking at the world, like that 16 to 18 people they let go to the worlds each year can be a small amount. So qualifying for that, just qualifying is a big deal, right? So they're the biggest one in the gi. They also run no-gi tournaments, but they have a more restrictive rule set, especially for the lower belt ranks. And that's led people to going to some of the other organizations that have more open rule sets. And by restrictive rule set, I mean they limit what you can wear. They want you to wear like certain types of rash guards and stuff, and they limit the types of moves you can do and some of the scoring. And a lot of people would argue it doesn't favor the better fighter in no-gi, but in the gi, they do this very similar rule set, and it's kind of seen as safe in the gi, and everyone kind of likes it, so they're okay for that. For no-gi, the biggest organization out there right now is the ADCC, which is the Abu Dhabi Combat Club, and so it started in Abu Dhabi. It's been put on by, there was a sheik who he's like famous for loving, combat sports, right? And especially jiu-jitsu. And what he wanted to do was start getting all the grapplers from the world together, kind of like early UFCs, and to see who was the best, right? So if you go back and watch the early Abu Dhabis, it's really cool. You got the Brazilians, obviously, who are doing jiu-jitsu. You got some just straight up wrestlers from America in there who are, like they know some joint lock stuff, but they're doing very, what we would think of as like collegiate style wrestling. You've got some judo guys, some like from other countries, some other types of like lesser known wrestling styles, and just seeing how they clash. Obviously, it's been that organization. The winners have been dominated by the Brazilians for a while. They take jiu-jitsu very seriously. They've figured out all the stuff. And then over the time, the ADCC has grown in popularity, mainly because they do better prize money for the fighters. Most jiu-jitsu tournaments don't do great prizes. They don't do good prize money. They'll do a medal, and it's like bragging rights, right? So if you want to teach or run a school or sell DVDs or online instructionals, that's how you get your credentials to do so. But ADCC started actually paying dudes. So that was one of the big draws early on. And they've been fairly well organized, and that's led to a lot of the expansion and kind of people wanting more no-gi matches because they can be more exciting. So they lend themselves to a more viewer-friendly audience for going online and people either purchasing, like pay-per-views or watching online matches. The gi can be a lot slower.
So for our OCR athletes, you'll already see a bunch of similarities with multiple world championships, multiple national championships, some holding more prestige than others. And then on top of that, some of them kind of attracting the bigger names or, bigger opportunities via larger prizes or cash payments to their athletes. And then you'll also see another comparison, the interest in the Middle East. So Spartan World Championship has been in the Middle East the last 2 years or last year and this coming year. So you see the influence of the Middle East there. And then finally, the comparison about, this rule set doesn't necessarily favor the best athletes. Again, the comparison between OCR World Championships, which is mandatory completion. So you have to do all the obstacles to make it to the finish line and win prize money. And Spartan, which typically has a very great draw of athletes that are very good at mountain running, but you can actually burpee out of obstacles. So there's a couple obstacles you can fail and do burpees and still theoretically win if you have a good enough lead on people as a runner. Now on the men's side, the men's typically have to do it. The winners will end up doing every obstacle, and even on the female side, the people who win typically end up doing basically every obstacle. So you occasionally get someone in the top that has to burpee on their way to a championship. But yeah, a lot of similarities I can see already. So yeah, jump back over to Jon and anything else you want to add about the multiple organizations?
No, just that there's not really one that's better than the other one. I'm sure you guys probably see this because the problem is the competitors themselves kind of pick and choose the ones they like. So you never really get you would want this dream tournament, right? Like I'm sure you would want this dream race with all the top guys and they would fight it out, right? And then that year, that tournament, that would be the winner, right? And everyone would know. And that's one of the big problems with all these different brands, and there's a bunch of sub brands running around the States and trying to start up. And it kind of like spreads everyone out so much that you got to be careful when you meet someone and they're like, oh, well, I'm a 5-time national champion, 2-time world champion. And you look at the tournaments they've won and you're like, okay, well, nah, that's maybe, right? Like a couple of these are legit, a couple of these not so much.
Yeah.
And, it kind of dilutes, the sport a little bit, and kind of hyperinflates a lot of people's like fighting resumes.
What would you say the percentage of crossover is? Like for OCR, a lot of the big names will do OCR World Championships and Spartan World Championships. And then some will cross over to the 24-hour, I would say, World Championships, which is World's Toughest Mudder. That one's a little bit more niche. And then on like the ninja side, you get even a smaller percentage of crossover there. So like what percentage between ADCC and IBJ, JJF? Yeah.
Probably around like a 60 to 70% will do both.
Okay, so I think that's about comparable, just off of like top of my head comparison.
Yeah, a lot of them specialize, and then it seems like a lot of the no-gi guys. Originally, the thought was, well, the gi guys, they're going to take off the gi and they don't even know where to grip, right? They can't fight. But that's not true. They perform really well no-gi, and what I've heard from some of the competitors is a lot of the tournaments they go to, they'll do a gi and a no-gi division. So some of these guys coming up training, they're getting in twice the tournaments the no-gi guys are. Because the no-gi guys, they're doing a bracket on Saturday. Well, the gi guy, he's doing Saturday and Sunday, or maybe Friday as well. And so they're building more experience. So they usually compete really well. There's been a handful of notable ones that run into no-gi and getting wrecked by people who are really good at leg locks because they never saw that before because it's against the rules. But it's rare for the no-gi guys to jump into some of the gi after they've competed at just no-gi at a high level. But a lot of that, once again, is because the no-gi stuff is where the money is, right? It's where the big shows are, like the super fights where it's just the 1v1 matches and like the big money tournaments. So a lot of those guys, you hear them talk about it like, why would I even bother doing the gi, right? To go get like a $5 medal, I don't even want it. So
Interesting. So is there a overall governing body? Because on the obstacle course racing side, there's been some talk of like creating a governing body or creating like essentially the equivalent of like if you do triathlon, the USA Triathlon, which is like an overall organization that you pay money to, and they act as some sort of governing structure.
No. So I mean, like, yeah, I've seen that before. Like USA Judo is kind of like that, and the Judo Federation. But no, for jiu-jitsu, so IBJJF tries to be that, and they do like a membership fee, and they've tried to like kind of like vet people, right? So you're making sure people actually are the belt rank they are and all that stuff, and that's good and bad, really. I mean, if you're not that good, you're going to get beat at the tournament. So it's kind of, at the end of the day, it's kind of a moot point. It's good to keep out maybe some of the sandbaggers, but there is no real way to stop a sandbagger if they say they're just a blue belt. You can't really tell them they're not. But for the other tournaments, they don't really do that. So they're not doing any kind of organizational type outreach or trying to, adopt a standard rule set for everybody. So it's kind of up in the air. And then you also will get schools who are actively against the IBJJF, right? So like a lot of schools I've trained at, they don't like them because they're like, well, they just want your money, they're not really verifying your belt. They just want money. And then,
sounds familiar.
And then they don't pay out a lot, right, for their tournaments. So yes, you get the prestige of winning them, but I mean, if you get your arm broken in the finals, like you're going home with medical bills at the end of the day.
Yeah, interesting. So have you any other thoughts on like a governing body? Like do do you want as a, you know, BJJ player, do you want a governing body, or you'd rather have it kind of more free like it is now?
So the only thing I think would be good about fixing if we had a governing body is the performance enhancing drug stuff.
Okay.
So at the competitive level, it's a big issue. Um, and a couple of the big fight promoters have just come out and said like, hey, we don't test our guys. It's fine. And so it almost needs to be like, all right, cool. If we're saying that, we're saying that for these organizations, because the IBJJF still they do limited drug testing. And they've had issues with people like not showing up for the finals day of matches because the drug testing team showed up and stuff like that. I think if we're going to do that, you know, maybe we split the categories, right? Like there's the natural category and there's the enhanced category. And if people want to take that health risk and put crazy stuff in their bodies, you know, just so they can be a super athlete for a couple of years, you know, fine. If they want to accept that risk, it's on them. But then it looks like to me like it puts a bunch of pressure on the young guys who want to be competitive and want to have a career in MMA or jiu-jitsu, like almost like, well, I gotta do it, right? Yeah. I won't be competitive if I don't. And then these organizations are out there actively, like ADCC and Fight to Win and a bunch of these other guys, they actively say like, hey, we don't do testing. You know, we're here to put on a show. It's entertainment. And I get that. That's how they make their revenue, right? And they can grow the sport and they can reward the fighters. But it does create a culture of that like pressure to, okay, well, everybody's going to have to do it in order to keep up because, you know, otherwise the big steroid monsters, they're just going to keep on winning and you'll never make it.
Yeah. Now, I mean, that's essentially the model that bodybuilding, I don't know how familiar you are with bodybuilding, but that's what this model bodybuilding uses, which the IB, get my acronyms confused, the IBBF, International Bodybuilding Federation, doesn't drug test, or sometimes they say they drug test, but it's for like extreme diuretics, or it's for like cocaine, or it's some random stuff that is not necessarily, it's not testosterone, it's not HGH, stuff like that. So you have these drugged up bodybuilders on stage, and then there's a separate brands that are natural, that are all natural. And then there's like brands that are like half natural, I'll say, because they're like, oh, well, as long as you haven't taken something in the last year or two, then you're good. And the trickle down effect, like you said, is if you're growing up and you're a young kid and you want to pursue a career in this sport, or even just like a high level hobby in that sport, and all the top people are taking drugs, then essentially it trickles down to the high school kids, where it's like, okay, well, now we all have to start taking drugs because that's what the pros are doing. And, you know, if I want to make it that far, that's what I'm going to have to do. And, you know, if we look at a large enough sample size, the people who are very well trained and taking drugs will, you know, win out of the people who are just very well trained. So, yeah, good insight there. Olympics. Let's talk about Olympics. Is there a push to get Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in the Olympics? And any thoughts on that?
So it comes and goes. It was a big push when the Olympics were going to be in Brazil, right? And everyone was like, well, it's, you know, this is the year we're going to get it in. But no. So because there's these different governing bodies and no one can agree on what the rule set should be, or who you know is the real world champion, they're all kind of against the Olympics, because they all kind of know the Olympics are like the most prestigious, you know, athletic event out there in the world. And if you tell someone, you know, I'm an Olympic gold medalist versus I'm a IJ 80 whatever medalist, people will weight one over the other, and that'll become the event that people train for, they prepare for, and whatever rule set those guys start adopting, that'll be the one that trickles down, and people start training like that to prepare, you know, for the Olympics. So a lot of the grapplers, like the pro guys and guys who run some of the larger organizations, they've publicly come out against, you know, jiu-jitsu going in the Olympics. And they're like, oh, it'll be bad for the sport. And I don't understand that aside from them making less money, because I feel like it would only increase exposure of the sport. It would give it more legitimacy. You would see other countries competing in it, and it would help the sport grow at the end of the day. And especially for something as basic as grappling, right? Like it's a branch of wrestling, which is one of the oldest sports. So it's weird to see this I would say a lot of the higher up jiu-jitsu guys, they're anti-Olympics of getting it in there, which is bizarre. But then on the other hand, they'll complain about, oh well, we just got to get out there more and educate the public, and the sport will take off if we do, right? If we could just figure out a way to cover it better and educate people. But then they actively fight against it when it comes to well, their organization's going to make less money if we do this. So, but I think it would be a net good for the sport if they join the Olympics. There are plenty of other sports in the Olympics that I don't think are quite as intense or as big practiced around the world, because a lot of the like a lot of the countries I've been in, stationed in or deployed in, I can always find a jiu-jitsu gym to go train at. It's like an international language, right? Fighting, and man, it's getting bigger, especially with the younger group that's growing up with UFC, and it probably won't eclipse a lot of the other sports out there, but it's definitely got room for expansion. And once people learn about it more and see it, it'll get up there with some of the other just recreational club sports people do. So I would think it would be Olympic level interest around the planet.
Yeah. No, it's definitely grown. I remember looking for a jiu-jitsu gym it must have been around 2003. I took martial arts training for the summer, and I was looking for a jiu-jitsu gym. Couldn't find one I was on Long Island, which is a very densely populated area, and I couldn't find one. And now it seems like there's one in every city, like across the nation. So definitely growing in the last 20 years. And some interesting comments on some of the Olympic stuff. I think the OCR, there's some factions that are really pushing for the Olympics. It definitely would bring more attention to the sport in general. The problem with OCR in the Olympics is, again, we'd have to standardize the obstacles, standardize the distance, standardize the terrain. So I think it would look a little more like steeplechase with OCR obstacles on the side instead of like hurdles and, water pits, stuff like that. So, but yeah, interesting. And, at the end of the day, the Olympics is a business, so they're looking at whatever they think they can make money. I would assume jiu-jitsu would fall pretty well into their model, though, because it doesn't take up a lot of space per se, right? So, like, I think OCR doesn't work well because it requires a lot of space. I think that's one of the reasons you don't see like ultra running in the Olympics, because it requires a lot of space and time. It seems like more of the combat sports should end up in the Olympics, especially with like the roots of like pankration and wrestling and boxing being all Olympic sports, back from 600 BC. So I don't know, just some thoughts there for people to chew on and mull over there. Yeah.
I think for the Olympics, like you could run the jiu-jitsu right where they do judo or wrestling, right? It's already basically
it's already got the stadium. You just add a couple of days to the schedule.
Yep.
Yeah. Versus OCR, again, you have to build structure, you have to build more space and to run the course essentially. So interesting. All right. Any other kind of final thoughts, shout outs, or final thoughts you want to share on jiu-jitsu versus OCR?
Yeah, I mean, I like both of them, right? I have limited experience in OCR, but it's a fun sport, and it's always, I think that's one of the things I like about jiu-jitsu, right? Is it's always different. That's kind of like keeps you coming back for more. It's not the same, no race is going to be the same. No competitors are going to be the same. And that's the fun thing with jiu-jitsu, right? It's always changing. Just like you guys, people come up with crazy new obstacles. Like people are coming out with new techniques all the time in jiu-jitsu, and you got to figure out how to get through it, right? Like people start doing weird leg locks or new chokes, and everyone's scratching their heads like, all right, how do we defend this one? And it just keeps on evolving. And everyone, it's funny, over the years, people think, okay, well, this is kind of it, right? This is the set we go with. And then, some kid comes along and starts choking people out like from underneath them or something crazy, right? And we're like, all right, it just keeps going. So it's fun. It kind of keeps you young, keeps your mind working, keeps you athletic. So I enjoy it. It's a good sport. And, I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a lot of similarities there with the variability and the, just like OCR, like there's a requirement to work, multiple sides. So you can't just be all really right side dominant because that's not the most efficient way to compete. So good for overall strength training and brain development. And then on top of that, jiu-jitsu, your heart rate is high and then it spikes and then it drops a little bit and then it spikes. You're going through like cycles, which is very similar to OCR and like compromised running, where my heart rate's high the entire race, but at obstacles it's spiking at certain points, and then I'm having to like regain my composure, reassess and kind of adjust my work output to make sure I make to the end of the race as fast as possible. So I can definitely see some crossover points there. All right. We like to ask people, tell us something people would be surprised to know about you. So with your armory and martial arts background here, what would people be surprised to know about you?
So probably the surprising fact for me is that I do jiu-jitsu, right? And I know that's dumb in this conversation because that's what we've been talking about. But when I meet people, I'm a pretty average looking white guy, right? I'm not huge. I don't have big muscles. But I love to fight, right? I love to grapple, especially. And in the gym, I'm that kid that my instructors over the years, they like pitting me against the new big dude, right? And because I'm going to try to use technique, I'm going to try to use the minimum force necessary to choke them out, just enough to win, right? And that's kind of like the cool thing about grappling is that it does work like the old kung fu movies promised us, right? That like, if you have enough skill, you can overcome this big dude. And like we've had we had like a big football player in the gym the other day, and the guy running the class, he'll just be like, "Hey John, can you roll with this dude?" And then I'll roll with him, and you catch him in some moves that he doesn't quite know not to duck his head, right? So he's gonna get choked and stuff like that. And it's fun. And then, he's kind of like in disbelief afterwards. And then the instructor pulls him aside and he's like, all right. So he's like, I just wanted to prove that this stuff works, right? So like, that guy, he doesn't have bigger muscles than you. He's not stronger than you. He's not faster than you. He's using this kind of hidden kung fu sport that we've developed on the ground. And it's real. And you can learn this too, right? Especially if you have the physical gifts, right? You could take it even further. And so that's kind of like the fun thing about being the lightweight guy in the gym is you're kind of like that little hidden weapon that gets to kind of demonstrate how it works to people. And it's always weird, when I, meet people and they're asking me about my hobbies and I'm like, oh, I like fighting. And they're like, oh, really? I kind of get this from like big army guys, right? Who are like power lifters and all this stuff. They kind of give me this, I don't know if you're really a fighter, right? And I'm like, well, come to the gym, man. Like I'm going to the gym tonight. Odds are I am. Come with me, try it, train. And those that take the invitation and come train with me, they're shocked, right? They're like, I didn't know this stuff was real. I didn't know it worked. So it's fun, and I enjoy that and try to pursue, technique over skill. I mean, like over strength, but strength and speed and all those things, they will only help you be better, right? And combining them with the skill is what wins the fight in the end of the day. So, you can never fully neglect them. But yeah,
great input there. Any advice you have for maybe people who are interested in signing up for jiu-jitsu or are maybe just starting out?
Yeah, it's just don't be afraid to be terrible at it for a long time. It's like I try comparing it to like golf or maybe shooting if people have ever gotten into shooting. But golf, like you can buy some nice clubs. You can go to the golf course and you'll just be terrible. Or if you've ever gone to Top Golf, and just like chip some balls into the dirt. But jiu-jitsu's like that. There's a big learning curve, and it can be tough, but it's real, right? Like you're investing in something that really works. So when you do start, winning a match, controlling a person, or choking them out, like you're, it's not like you're at like the kickboxing cardio class at your gym. You're learning a thing that really works, and so if you want something that really works, it's going to take you a lot of time to develop it. So it's an investment. Most people are terrible for the first 2 to 4 years, right? And that sounds like a really long time to people who are thinking of it as a hobby. But it goes by, and then every one of us, we're going to be somewhere in 4 or 5 years. You might as well be better at fighting, right? If you just stick with it. If you don't, then those dudes at the gym, though, they are going to be better at fighting. And so, yeah, just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to fail, right? Like we talk about it in racing and stuff like that. But there's a little bit of ego kick when someone beats us in a fight that can make you not want to go back to that gym and face that. And getting over that can be tough.
Yeah. Good advice. Good stuff there. All right. Any final shout outs you want to give? Friends, family, sponsors, whoever, brands you like, etc.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like Combative Sports Center is my home gym in Manhattan, Kansas. I kind of consider myself a student of everybody, right? Because I move around so much. And I've trained at a bunch of different styles, but definitely, Professor Sean Roberts has been one of my main jiu-jitsu instructors, along with Joe Wilk and Josh Pfeiffer and all the guys at the gym. I've had the great fortune of getting to train in Kansas with them a lot. All my other belts and stripes I've got from like random people at random, different places, but it's a great community. Everybody kind of takes care of you, and the jiu-jitsu belts transfer real well, right? Because you roll, and either you can roll or you don't at the other gyms. And then I don't know, just my wife for putting up with my nonsense and piles of dirty, stinky laundry that smell like the collective sweat of 20 other dudes, in our house all the time. And all my crazy ramblings and telling her about like, oh, I found this new choke and all this stuff. And she puts up with me great. She's a trooper. So I love her. She's been super supportive and, takes care of me.
Gotcha. All good stuff there. So if any of our listeners want to check out the Strength and Speed website, it is teamstrengthspeed.com. On there, you'll find links to all the other podcasts. We do have a fighting section if you're more interested in the martial arts stuff. And I've broken down the podcasts that are specifically related to martial arts in that fighting subsection. You can go there and click on, I think it's like knowledge or something like that under the fighting tab. And you can just listen to the martial arts ones, or you can go back and listen to some of our older episodes. We've got over 200 episodes. If you're interested in more on the mindset of endurance athletes or just competing in general, my newest book on endurance is available on Amazon, digital and hard copy. You can pick it up there. It's also recently released on Kindle Unlimited. So if anyone who has Kindle Unlimited, you can read that for free. You just go in and click download and bring it to your device and then, read through the pages. Or, if you want, just flip through the pages. That helps too, because I get it like a penny every time someone reads a page or something, some ridiculously low amount of money for reading, for all the writing I've done. And then if you, John, I work with him in the Army. If anyone's interested in more of some Army stories, some Army backstory, and some of the endurance challenges I've done that have raised money for veterans. My biography is also available on Audible, Amazon, and off my website. So if you like audiobooks, great thing to listen to on your drive, to and from work or cross training, going for a run, whatever. And then digital version available for download on Amazon, and then the hard copy, again, off Amazon or off my website, teamstrengthspeed.com. You can check all that stuff out. And then if anyone wants some like general strength training plans or kind of interested in getting into the world of OCR, maybe you're a jiu-jitsu guy and want to get deeper into OCR, I'd recommend my first book, which is the New Strength and Speed Guide to Elite Obstacle Course Racing. Talks about training plans and periodized training and tapering and all that stuff, and working on grip strength, all the good stuff you need for being a competitive OCR athlete or just improving in your age group. So you guys can check that out. Jon, thanks again for coming on. Thanks again for beating me up at the gym and teaching me some good techniques and some moves. I always appreciate getting to roll with higher level people. It's like you said, it's always a hit to the ego and it's humbling, but I always find value in learning from the people who've been doing this a lot longer. So I really do appreciate it. And looking forward to training with you some more and some of the rest of the guys. Anything else?
No, thanks for having me on, Evan. Yeah, it's a pleasure training with you guys, and no, I love it. I hope our group just continues to grow on the base, and everyone just gets tougher and better.
Yeah. So for the first infantry division has a combatives team, so I've been training there for the last couple of weeks. That's how I ended up running into Jon. Besides, I work in the same building as him, but we don't cross paths that often. But yeah, I've been doing. It's been brutal for the last 3 weeks. I've been doing essentially two. We do training 6 to 8 in the morning, 11:30 to 1, and then on top of that, because I still have to prep for OCR, like I run usually after one of those practices. So it's like, I don't know. Every week is it's a grind now at this point. And then I got picked for Ninja Warrior again, so I'm in Kansas City this weekend training for that. So it's just training on top of training. So busy man. All right, I'll see you around. Thanks again for coming on, and best wishes on future competitions. And let us know when you're competing again. We'll share some of your stuff on social media. Oh, and where can people follow you? Do you have Instagram or anything like that?
Instagram.
You broke up there. One more time.
Just Jon Jordan on Facebook and Instagram, and there's a bunch of us. I'm the jiu-jitsu guy making an angry face in my picture, so that's how you know it's me.
Nice. All right. We'll catch you later.
All right. Take it easy.